What's going on, everybody? Dylan Manfrey on hand for the Sport Profile. So excited to be joined by one of my favorite writers for NJ.com and Advanced Media, Matt Lombardo, who covers the NFL and the New York Football Giants. Matt, how you doing today?
I'm great, Dylan. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. So, we were just talking about what things would be like if they're going back. I know we are still a ways away from, September, the NFL coming back. Now, I was talking with, my cousin's husband yesterday who works for the NBA, and he's actually going to be going to Orlando for 3 months because he works for the NBA. So how comfortable would you feel, if the Giants were to be doing some stuff in person? How comfortable would you feel going if, they do allow media availability back?
Yeah, Dylan, I think this is going to be really interesting across the NFL, not just with the Giants, but every team, because the spread of the virus is just at different stages, different places across this country. And I think it's going to be really, really difficult for the NFL to come up with some sort of uniform policy in terms of media access and who's in the facility, who's not in the facility. So my personal comfort level, I have a daughter who was born prematurely and spent some time in the NICU when she was first born. My wife has severe asthma. And even though I don't have any comorbidities or pre-existing conditions that would put me at any sort of risk, I do have to think about my family. And of course, if there's access at the facility, I'll be there just like every other reporter. I think that it's going to be different, though. I don't think that reporters are going to be in locker rooms at all during the 20. I'd be a little bit surprised if there are reporters in the seats in games at NFL games this season, because you think about how cramped the press boxes are.
Sure.
You do have a lot of writers who are, older than I am and, might have comorbidities and pre-existing conditions that would put them at risk for being there. So I think that when you look at everything around the NFL and across this country right now with the spread of different cases across the country and different rates and where teams are located, I think it's going to be much more likely that there are going to be a lot more conversations taking place with reporters, players, and coaches, just like you and I are having right now via Zoom or Skype, than anything that happens on campus at these facilities. Now, I will say this. I think during training camp, it's something that teams could facilitate access to watch practice. So if I'm out there wearing a mask and I'm 12 feet away from any other colleague and we're socially distant, I think that's something that you could pull off relatively easily, just not allow media into facilities, hold press conferences outside in the open air that are socially distant. I think you could do it that way, and I'd feel relatively comfortable with that. But I think it's going to take a vaccine or some significant development for myself or any other reporter, for that matter, to be on site in facilities in 2020.
Do you envision there being some sort of labor struggle like we're seeing with the MLB right now, given, the relationship between, NFL owners and, players in recent years?
Yeah, I think that's very possible, Dylan, because, look, the baseball union is significantly stronger and more united than the NFLPA has ever been. And we've seen that through some of the ways that the owners have kind of gotten the upper hand in negotiations for CBAs, not only this most recent one, but back during the 2011 lockout. I think that any time you have full revenue with a full set of seats being sold in stadiums all across the league, you're going to have these acrimonious conversations. You're going to have negotiations about revenue sharing and splitting the pot when it comes to TV revenue and merchandise. But I will say this, I think that the NFL has an upper hand over a lot of the other leagues because such a significant portion of the league's revenue comes from TV ratings, comes from advertising. Games are going to be televised. They don't rely on the gate checks so much as, say, Major League Baseball does, and to a lesser degree, the NBA does. I think the NBA is certainly more of a guidepost from what we're going to see from an NFLPA standpoint in terms of negotiations, but don't rule out the NFLPA taking a hard stand about the portion and the piece of the pie, of the revenue pie, they're going to expect if there's less revenue coming in for the owners.
Yeah, of course. So what's it been like covering the Giants in this time period? Like, have you been doing a lot of Zoom interviews? I know the biggest thing, NFL wise was the draft. So what was that night like for you?
Yeah, the draft was great because, unlike past years where you have to commute to the facility and you're there until 11:30, midnight, 1 in the morning on Thursday and Friday nights, I got to stay home like everybody else. And you get to watch it on TV. And the Giants, to their credit, made Joe Judge and General Manager Dave Gettleman available on a Zoom call like this. after every pick. We had Zoom conversations with all of the draft picks, either the day they were drafted or the following day. So we got those interviews that way. And overall, we've spoken to Joe Judge a couple of times throughout this offseason. We've spoken to a handful of players via Zoom. And I think that that's kind of a barometer for what the rest of this season is going to look like, right? Like we talked about before, if we're not on site, if reporters aren't at the Quest Diagnostic Training Center, there's going to be a lot more virtual press conferences like this. I think there's going to be a lot more group conversations on Zoom with some of the star players on the team, and maybe some one-on-one Zooms with some of the lesser-known players on the team. But I think that this offseason has really indicated that, you know, some players might actually have preferred their offseason program with Zoom meetings and 2-hour film study type of sessions as a group each day. And for the media, I think that it cuts down on commute time and can be a little bit more productive. You do lose a lot in terms of not being in the locker room, not being able to talk to guys off on the side one-on-one. You're going to see a lot less exclusive content. Maybe some of the content isn't going to be able to separate itself from the pack, which is going to be the challenge for everybody and something that I'm looking forward to trying to compete in.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, how have you been able to really try to distinguish yourself, you know, from other reporters to maybe get that exclusive story, you know, in this time? Like, has it been harder to get, I guess, a hold of athletes when you want to talk to them?
Yeah, I think it just comes down to working your sources, right? Whether that's agents or scouts or people across the league to try to paint a broader picture of what the league thinks about the Giants. And, you know, some players that you might know inside the locker room might be able to give you a couple crumbs to follow, the breadcrumbs to follow on a trail to a bigger story. Similar to when I broke the story that the Giants were holding a virtual team meeting about the aftermath of George Floyd's death and the protests across the country. I got a tip from a player, followed up with a couple other sources, and was able to put it out there. I think you're going to see a lot of that. You're going to see a lot of conversations on Zoom where maybe a player says something in a group setting that sticks in a reporter's mind. Like, oh, that's an interesting story. Let me go out and try to track some people down who might be able to give insight on that rather than just relying on what the players themselves have to say.
What's your mentality like, you know, when you're going to, I guess, try to approach a source, you know, I guess asking to confirm something for you? Because, you know, I've heard different things from everybody. And, you know, for me as somebody who's just starting out, like that's the level I want to get at, where I can, you know, maybe put out a tweet one day that says league source said blah, blah, blah. You know, I feel everybody sees that and, you know, they get excited because, you know, they're right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of stuff, nothing's really changed there, right? Because whether it's people within the Giants organization, people who used to be employed by the Giants, people around the league, coaches, GMs, executives, you know, you make those connections during the combine in Indianapolis. You make those connections at the Senior Bowl where you can, you know, step into a bar and buy a drink for a guy and just, you know, talk football for a little bit and kind of put a name and all of those things. So far, the coronavirus and the pandemic hasn't really changed a lot of how, you know, that stuff is done. But I think it's really made that sort of reporting all the more valuable because, like we talked about, that's how you're going to get the unique angles. That's how you're going to get the unique storylines, not from the players who are talking to 15 reporters at the same time, but from somebody who says, hey, this is what's really going on, or why don't you look into that?
If somebody gives you a tip, how do you go about like confirming it? Like, do you text like two different people, you know, saying like, hey, did this actually happen? Or is this true? Like, how do you approach something like that?
Yeah, I think that's the best way to do it. I mean, if it's somebody that I implicitly trust and who has been honest and forthright with me and it's a rock solid source, there's times I might just, you know, go with that tip and right around that tip. Otherwise, yes, you reach out to, you know, players who might be involved in a position group meeting where whatever you're reporting was said or what actually happened might or might not have happened. But typically, I don't like to run with a story unless I have it corroborated by 2 or 3 different people who would know what's and that's another thing where, you know, if that happens during a regular season, you can walk up to any player and say, hey, you know, so-and-so said this. Did that really happen? It's a little bit more difficult to do when you're not going to be in the locker room and not being able to pull these guys aside after a lot back to a text message or picking up a phone call or answering a DM or something like that. So it's going to be fascinating. It's going to be a new challenge, but it's one that, hey, this is what we get paid the big bucks for.
Right. I understand. So what about reporting like makes you tick? Like what got you interested in this? Like how did you get interested? You know, a lot of people come for me, I feel like there's 2 boats. One is, you know, somebody who was a former athlete and realized, all right, I'm not going pro, but I'm a decent writer. Or they just really loved writing, loved sports, and put two and two together. So what really was it for you?
It was really a combination of both, Dylan, because when I was, in middle school and high school, and even before that in Little League, I played baseball, played football for a couple of years in the Pop Warner level. I was always the scrawny kid, couldn't really put on weight. So football, I knew I loved it. It was my favorite sport. I had a passion for it, but I wasn't going to go pro.
Right.
I have the height advantage. I was pretty good on defense. I was a rim defender, as you would say. Not much on the offensive end. Wasn't going to go pro there either.
Right.
But I always grew up reading some of the great sports columnists locally and nationally. I was the kid who woke up at 7 a.m. each day and put on Sports Center to start the day, whether it was a Saturday morning or getting ready for school during the week. I just always loved sports, had a passion for it, and knew that, okay, if I'm not going to be able to go pro, let me find a way and find a career where this can be my passion and where I can be the guy that, when a big trade happens, they want to hear what Matt Lombardo has to say, or they want to pick up the paper and read from me what actually went down. And that's just something that really has followed me from childhood up until now. And I'm fortunate enough that I grew up in suburban Philadelphia. Some of my first jobs in sports talk radio were in the Philadelphia market. I now cover the New York Giants in the largest market in the country, one of the heritage franchises of the NFL. So it's been a nice career, whereas some people have had to travel all around into these smaller markets and smaller cities and work their way up. I've been blessed with the opportunity to kind of follow my dream, but not have to follow the woe begone and winding path that a lot of people have. And I don't take that for granted one bit. And
Right.
certainly that I want to keep building on as my career progresses and as this industry continues to change and evolve.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, what was the transition like? I know you originally covered the Eagles, now the Giants. What type of transition is that like from going all in on one team to all in on another?
Yeah, it's interesting because, it's one of those things where, okay, you have connections in that locker room and in that organization that you can still, tap into for some bigger stories.
Or
And it was one of those opportunities where it presented itself at NJ.com, and there have been some great reporters from NJ.com who have gone on to do some great things at the national level. So when that opportunity was presented to me, it's something that I couldn't think twice about. I absolutely had to go all in and try to invest in myself, that if I can go to the Giants beat, go into the New York market and kind of separate myself and put out quality work, who knows where this could lead the next couple rungs up the ladder. But it's one of those things where if you've been in one NFL locker room, you've kind of been in them all, right? You know
or
how to make friendships that can turn into sources. You know how to build connections with people in front offices. It just comes down to talking to people, getting your name out there, getting your face out there, being around the team. And some of those connections, like I said, they can go on to help you with stories about the Giants or about the NFL, rather than and other than just helping you out when you were covering the Eagles, as I did when I
right,
first started.
right. I know you had done some radio stuff as well. Why radio? Like, what do you like so much about radio that got you interested in it?
Yeah, I loved it growing up, Dylan. And, growing up when I was 6, 7 years old, I would always get in these long car rides with my dad and say, hey, we could all put on the sports talk radio. And we'd listen to sports talk. And it was all
Yeah.
that was ever on in my dad's car radio. It's what I put on to fall asleep to at night, whether it was listening to a show. And it's something that I always felt like, okay, I can do this. I have strong opinions about sports. I can carry a conversation. Let me see if I can do it. And I was fortunate enough to do it in a top 5 market in the country, in one of the most passionate sports cities in the country. And I think that it's one of those things where it was fun to do, and it was a challenge because you have to figure out how to fill 4 hours of time some
Right.
nights, a hockey game, or in the middle of August where there's not much sports going on. So certainly it was one of those things where it was difficult at times, but it was a lot of fun and really rewarding at the same time.
Of course. So who has been like who's been your biggest hero, throughout your life or, your career? Like, did you have any inspirations or mentors that really helped get you to where you are today?
Yeah, I think the biggest hero and role model was my dad. He's always motivated me professionally, and he's a guy that runs an insurance agency, works 80 hours a week, and when I was growing up was always there, coached my little league team, helped out on the chain gang when I played football, took my sister to dance class, always found a way to, while working as hard as he could and becoming one of the top tier people in his profession, still was able to maintain a strong family life and provide for us. And that always, struck a chord with me, the value of hard work. And if you're going to do something, you do it right. And professionally, one of the people who's always looked out for me and I consider a really good friend and a mentor is Sal Palantonio from ESPN. He's a guy that
Yeah.
has helped my career, giving me advice. If I'm trying to find direction on how to take a story, maybe I'll pick up the phone and call Sal, or maybe he'll be a guy who says, hey, maybe you should look into this, and it might lead to something for me. And he's supported my work, in the past, and somebody that I met while doing radio in Philadelphia. So certainly there's been people in the industry and out of the industry that I've looked up to and I owe an immense amount to. So when young writers and young reporters and young journalists come along, I like to try to do my best to help them in some way to kind of pay it forward and return the favor that the people who came before me, did for me as I've come up in my career.
Of course. So over, I guess, the past few months, we've seen a lot of layoffs, a lot of furloughs. Now, the narratives I think that are pushed on people my age and really the journalism industry as a whole is that it is very cutthroat, and it's no secret. So at any point in time, early in your career, were you able to like block off those narratives and say like, hey, this is what I really want to do. I'm focused. I know I'm a good reporter, and I'm able to just brush that off.
Yeah, I think that it can be a difficult come up in this business, right? And even when I was in college, I interned at the local paper and covered high school sports. When I graduated college, I hosted a morning show that was news and sports talk, and then did some play-by-play for local high school teams. And at the same time, I was working a couple shifts a week at Staples, stocking shelves, or I was, working at a fast food restaurant, just out of college to quote unquote pay the bills. And
Right.
my parents enough to put me in a position where they helped me out at times when they could. Not everybody has that same advantage, but when you're young in this industry, you almost have to, at least I did 5-10 years ago, carve out the time to do this and make a name for yourself doing this. But unfortunately, you might have to take that waiter or waitress job. You might have to take that job stocking shelves. You might have to do something else to supplement the income just to make it possible. And I know that's not the case in other industries. I know that there are a lot of entry-level jobs that you can make a career-level salary out of, but I just didn't see myself being happy for my whole life working behind a desk 9 to 5, 26, 52 weeks a year. This was
Right.
something and I knew that if I had to do some other things along the way to position myself to do this, I wanted to give it my best shot and see where it led.
So when you were doing those other jobs, like you said, like at Staples or at a fast food restaurant, was that goal in your mind of, hey, I'm going to be a top, beat reporter? Was that goal still in your mind?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like I said, I was doing radio at the time. I was writing at the time. I was doing sports updates for the ESPN radio affiliate in Atlantic City at that time. So I always tried to juggle a lot of different opportunities just to see where I would end up. And for a while, it was the talk radio avenue. And that's where eventually the job at 97.5 down in Philly paid off, because I started out as a producer and then went on air and I hosted, weeknights and weekends. And then you got to a point on the ladder where, okay, this is as far as it's going to go for me here. It feels like I'm never going to be in that prime time slot where a lot of the big money salaries are. And I continued writing, and I was covering the Eagles on the side. And that's when NJ.com came calling and offered a full-time position. So I kind of changed lanes. And I think that my goal has always been to be one of those top-tier national NFL reporters. And I know I have a long way to go to get there. I know I have a lot of work that I need to do to reach that level, but that's something that I still have my sights set on. And that's where, in terms of covering the Giants, I'm trying to, stand out from the pack the best I can, tell good stories, break news when possible, build on connections, and hopefully that leads another rung up the ladder.
Right. Is there a type of story that you really like to write a lot more, whether it's those feature stories, hard news, or breaking news stories that really you get excited when you get to write a story like that?
Yeah, I think one of the favorite things that I've written recently, two of them, one's a little bit negative, one's a lot more positive. Right around the Super Bowl, I was able to speak with some analytics experts and the GM of the Kansas City Chiefs, Brett Veach, and John Lynch, the GM of the 49ers, during Super Bowl week, to kind of put the finishing touches on a story that quoted a lot of experts on how the Giants have fallen behind in their use of analytics over the years under Dave Gettleman, and what they need to do to catch up to teams like the New England Patriots, like the Eagles, like the Baltimore Ravens that really have made analytics one of the core of how they build their rosters. And as a result, they've become Super Bowl caliber contenders year in and year out. And that was a story that I really enjoyed writing. And then right after the draft, when the Giants took Andrew Thomas, I was able to provide the inside story on how he rose up their draft board, what it was like that night in Andrew Thomas's living room when he got the phone call that he was going to be the Giants pick at number 4 overall, and how his life was going to change. So that was a lot of fun for me. And I think that overall, those in-depth features are a lot of fun, but I really enjoy when I get to break news on a trade, a signing, and kind of break it down to the next level of, okay, here's what it really means. Here's why they traded for this guy. Here's why they signed that guy. And here's why it matters.
Was there, I guess, a story or piece of news that you broke that just like blew up and went really viral, and you're just like, oh, this is like really cool. Like this is what I love to feel.
Yeah, when I was covering the Eagles, it was Chip Kelly's final season as head coach, and it was Thanksgiving weekend. The Eagles were playing the Detroit Lions on Thursday night, and I think I wrote the story and published it on a Tuesday. I had gotten a tip from an agent who represents a starting player on the Eagles roster, heard it from a couple players that he had lost the locker room, and that Jason Peters, the Eagles left tackle, wasn't playing through. He was healthy enough to play hurt, but he wasn't going to play for Chip Kelly, that he would sit out. And that went viral. Sal Palantonio and John Clayton led SportsCenter with it that night.
Wow.
Jason tapped out with a minor injury in that Lions game. And then a couple of weeks later, when Chip Kelly was fired, the very next day, for the first time since training camp, Jason Peters was a full participant in practice. So not only did that story kind of blow up and go viral, which is always a lot of fun, but things happened along the way that corroborated what I reported. And while I was always confident in the story, it's just reassuring to see, okay, these things actually happened based on my reporting and then continued to after the fact.
So I know I asked like what that feeling is really like, but have you ever maybe like were you ever nervous to like put something out that you knew it was right, but like is this like what's gonna happen? Like, are you ever nervous at all when you're about to do something like that?
Yeah, I think that happens a lot more in terms of when I write a strong opinion piece, when I write a strong column. For example, when DeAndre Baker was arrested on the armed robbery and aggravated assault with a firearm charges, I was pretty quick out of the gate to say that, hey, as soon as Baker turns himself into police, the Giants should move on from DeAndre Baker, because you need to set a standard for what the culture is going to be in that locker room with
Sure.
Joe Judge. Set a standard that this sort of stuff won't be tolerated. And that wasn't really well received by Giants fans. And I understand that. There's due process and innocent until proven guilty in this country and all of those things.
Right.
But my great was, I'm not saying throw DeAndre Baker in jail without a trial. I'm saying that employment by the New York Giants, and for the purpose of a new head coach walking into a locker room for the first time, it's toxic to have a player who is accused of these things in that locker room. So those are the things that when you put something out with a strong opinion, in the back of your mind, you're hoping for validation, but it can be nervous when you start getting that pushback on Twitter from people who don't agree with you, and sometimes really strongly don't agree with you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I see reporters like putting out a bunch of stuff, whether it's like weird emails they've gotten, like saying like, what are you doing? Like, this is stupid. When you're right. It's sort of like those internet trolls, if you will. I'm sure you've had your fair share of experiences with them, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Just
what?
just a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say I've had any experiences like that. I don't know if I want to say yet, because maybe I will, maybe I won't. I mean, I'm hoping not, but I feel like it's inevitable. But yeah,
And
anyway.
that's biggest parts of this industry where I think that I would enjoy this job and enjoy this career a lot more if it weren't for Twitter, and if Twitter weren't a thing, or if there was some sort of way that Twitter could police itself a lot better, that you don't have people hiding behind a picture of Daniel Jones or a Giants logo and a fake name, that there'd be some accountability to what you put out there. Because, for me, I have a family, my name is out there, my face is out there on Twitter. If I say something, it's coming from me.
Right.
But if YG 2011 Super Bowl champs Eli Manning 11 says something, you don't know who that is. They could be anybody. And you kind of, there's been times you feel like you have to kind of look over your shoulder when you go into a supermarket or when you stop at a rest stop on your commute because of something you might have said or tweeted or what somebody said to you. And those are the type of things that I think it's a stronger and bigger indicator of kind of the, negative aspects of our society as much as it is a microcosm of some of the negatives of being in this field and being a reporter.
Have you ever, had to maybe like you just said, like look over your shoulder, a bit when maybe you are out with your family because, something you put out was really strongly opinionated?
I can't really get into this one, Dylan,
Oh, yeah.
because there have been circumstances, and I'm not allowed to talk about this part of it. If
No,
that's okay.
yeah, of course, of course. So describe to me in a normal situation, like what a day in the life, what your game day routine is. You're going to go to the stadium. What's your game plan?
Yeah, the game plan is, I use my drive up to kind of think about what could happen in that game, maybe something that would have happened during the week or what somebody might have said during the week that sticks in my mind. There's something that could happen during the game. And then you get to the stadium, get all set up. I'll watch pregame warmups because a lot of times that's when you'll kind of get a clue for who's active, who's not active, because the inactive players will go through their pregame warmups before the starting players do. So you might be able to get a tip of, oh, wow, so-and-so he's warming up with the inactive group. He's probably not going to play. Then after that's all done, maybe I'll go grab a bite with some of the other reporters back in the lunchroom and, kind of talk about what we've seen that week, just joke around and have some good conversation. And then the game comes, and typically I'll write a quarterback report card for at the final gun, right when the game, comes to an end, or maybe it's a story where I'll write 6 or 7 observations off the game that goes live right after the game at the final gun. Then we're down in the locker room, and that's where you're interviewing players and trying to, kind of hone in on what you're going to write more in depth later that afternoon and again for that next morning.
How have you been able to mold your own reporting philosophies as your career has ascended to where it is now? Everybody is always giving advice to other people, but how did you really come into your own? I mean, I know it also takes experience, but how have you been able to come into your own reporting philosophy?
Yeah, I think it just comes down to you have to be yourself, right? You can't pretend to be somebody else. You can't pretend to be somebody that you're not. And if somebody asks you, for example, to write a strong, opinionated column that don't have a strong opinion about, maybe it's best to ask somebody else on your staff to write that column. And, I'm a guy that's not going to pull a lot of punches. I'm going to call it like I see it. That's something that I told myself way back when I started in this industry, that I don't want to pull punches. And if I have to write negative about somebody, because that's what I see, that's what I observe, that's what I feel, I'm going to write negative about that person, but I'm going to be at that guy's locker stall that afternoon or the next day, to kind of ask questions and certainly give them an opportunity that if they saw it to say, hey, Matt, what the heck were you thinking there? Or why would you write that? And at the same time, if I see somebody who's doing great things, it's a lot easier then to write great things about that player and not be accused of being a sycophant or somebody who's a mouthpiece for the player or the organization. So
Yeah.
I think that those things are, if you're looking to get into this industry, you have to figure out what kind of reporter you want to be, and you have to figure out, your own voice. Find your own voice and your own style, because as much as you can read everybody, and I do advise reading everybody, read all the great columnists,
Right.
read all the reporters, read ESPN, read Pro Football Talk, all of those things, Pro Football Focus, but then kind of use that to come up with your own voice and your own writing style, and don't pretend to be somebody else, because that comes across as something that can be viewed pretty easily by other people. They can see right through it.
Yeah, I understand that. So you mentioned you are really active on Twitter. What are some things that you like to do aside from reporting? Because you do have you have a family. What type of things you like to do outside of reporting? I know you love to grill.
Yeah, I love to grill during the summertime. I love to play golf. I haven't been able to play nearly as much golf this year, of course, because of the coronavirus.
Yeah.
In a typical summer, maybe I'll play once a weekend, or sneak out for an early morning rounds at 6:30 in the morning before anybody else is awake, and
Really?
get We love going down the shore. That's not going to happen this summer, unfortunately, because of the virus. But I got more time at my dad's house, the house I grew up in. There's a big swimming pool in the backyard. Getting my daughter up there as often as possible. Love spending time with family. And, when you talk about Twitter, I think that Twitter is great in terms of reporting and sharing, my work. I also think it's an outlet to kind of, if possible, influence change when it comes to some of the things that are happening in our country right now. And I'd like to show the grilling and the food and the time with my family, just a way to kind of give people who follow me a little bit of a glimpse for what my life is like outside of what I do for a living. And I think that that's important.
Sure, sure. I guess one of my last questions would be, what's your biggest advice that you've received throughout your career that's, really struck with you and really stuck?
Yeah, I think that, it's a tough business and you have to really want it. And if you want to do this for a living and it's something that you want to see through, then you should go all out to see it through. And my dad told me long ago that if you're going to do something, do it right or don't do it at all. So to me, if I'm going to be in this industry, I'm going to try my best every day. And if I can, go to sleep at night knowing that I did my best to put out some quality content, I can rest easy with that. It's the nights where you're struggling to come up with ideas or there's not much going on, that's what keeps you awake. That's what causes you to toss and turn. But my advice to someone like you or somebody coming up the industry is stay true to yourself and just work hard, write as often as you can, read as often as you can, and just keep doing it. Because when I look at stuff that I wrote in the last 6 months, it looks significantly different than it did 6 and 8 years ago. And that's just, a natural arc in this career. The more that you do, just like sports, the more practice reps that you take, the better you're going to be.
Yeah, I guess actually that, poses another question. How have you gauged your own growth over the course of your career?
I think it comes down to a lot of things. I think it comes down to the relationships that I've made and the ability to pick up the phone and call a current general manager in the league or a scout that I would have even dreamed of having those conversations 5, 6, 7 years ago with those kind of people. I think, you look back at some of the things that I wrote 5, 6 years ago, and it just looks a little bit more rudimentary maybe than the stuff that I'm writing now. It's one of those things where you kind of know it when you see it. And I think that, in terms of my career growth, I think I've come a long way, but I certainly have a long, long ways to go to where I think that I want to ultimately wind up.
Right. All right, Matt. I really appreciate your time. It means the world to me, and I'm really looking forward to writing this story.
Dylan, appreciate you having me on. Best of luck with everything. And if you ever need anything, please don't hesitate to ask.
Of course. Thank you so much. All right. So that's all. Thank you again. It
Thank
really means a lot.
Hopefully that helped. I wasn't sure exactly what you were looking for, but hopefully that was helpful for you.
No, that was more than perfect. More